Welcome to A Canadian Investing in the U.S., a podcast and YouTube channel focused on Canadians buying real estate with host Glenn Sutherland.
Welcome to another episode of A Canadian Investing in the U.S. This week, my guest is Chad Urbshott. Chad, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Glenn, for having me on the show. So I'm a real estate investor, been one since about 2006, 2007 era. Started off by investing in single family rentals. Actually, they were lease options for, rent owns.
Yep.
Did a number of those. Then I got into student apartment investing. After buying a few of those, realized I didn't really want to own animal houses any longer, even though they were terrific cash flow. And I should back up and say I'm actually a civil engineer, structural engineer originally. So I worked for a number of construction companies back in my corporate days.
Yeah. And
one of them I worked for, we did design builds. And so that kind of led me into doing some commercial development. So I did a couple commercial development. And all along the way, I think it was like 2012-ish, I was heading down to, I don't know if it's even still around anymore, but the Canadian Real Estate Wealth magazine. They used to hold an annual conference up at the exhibition center. It was up by the airport. It was, but one year they had it downtown at the underneath the CN Tower. I can't remember the exact name, but the Metro Center, I guess. So I was heading down there for a friend of mine, a fellow real estate investor, and he said to me on the way down, he said, I'm really thinking about investing in the U.S. This is back in 2012. He said, such great deals down there. The rents that you can get for these places are just astronomical. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, like, how do you expect to manage something from like 2,000 miles away in a different country? Like, I have problems managing stuff from 2 hours away. Like,
yeah.
So in any event, we get to the conference, and there was a bunch of vendors there, not a bunch, maybe a handful of vendors that were U.S. based and that were touting, U.S. Real estate properties.
Yep.
And sat in a couple of sessions, and I was just blown away at exactly what he said. Like, the rent to price ratios were just like out of this world, like, compared to what you can get to even back in 2012, the rents here compared to the prices that you're paying were still pretty crazy. They're even crazier now, but yeah, I just couldn't believe you can get a $50,000 property and $900 a month in rent. So I was kind of hooked on the U.S. real estate at that point. And in 2000, I guess around that time frame, 2012, 2013, I just made the plunge and started investing down in Florida. And it's been a long road since then, but here I am today, and we can talk a bit more about what we do. So.
Yeah, so just to jump into Florida, just briefly, what were you doing in Florida? Like single family homes? What was your sort of game in Florida?
Yeah, so the first couple deals were just trying to buy rentals. And after buying a couple, and as you well know, it's hard to get mortgages down there. It was like practically non-existent back then. Like, not even U.S. citizens were getting mortgages that time frame. So after buying a couple, I was like, oh, that's really smart. Now I'm out of money, and I have like I can't do anything else, kind of thing. And that's when and it was also starting to get really heated at that point. Like, even back to 2012, 2013, the economy was starting to pick back up. Real estate market was starting to pick back up, and the deals it was hard to find deals, like, multiple bidding offers on almost anything and everything. So I stumbled upon buying from foreclosure auctions, and I basically just set myself out to learn that business and figure out how to buy from auctions. And that was the only place where I could find really good deals at that point in time. So that's kind of how I cut my teeth and kind of like jumped into the deep end with no paddle, and definitely learned what not to do very quickly in that business. So that wasn't exactly I wouldn't say the smartest way, but it was, when you're starting to invest in a different country, not knowing anything about that side of the business, it was definitely a learning experience. So.
We weren't planning on going this direction at all, but like the foreclosure auctions probably just piqued a whole bunch of interest. Were you doing like online auctions or in-person auctions?
So they were like the traditional courthouse auctions, like not REOs that you buy on auction.com or all that. It was like literally at the courthouse. But in Florida, especially, everything's online anyway, so
Yeah.
you could bid from anywhere. So I'd actually hired this consulting firm that they kind of they did it by proxy, I guess if you want to call it that. So they would act on your behalf and pick out, the properties that met, certain criteria, and or you give them your criteria, and they would go ahead and kind of like bid on your behalf, but it was all online, so you could see exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
So you could follow along. So yeah, after doing a few of those, realizing that this consulting firm didn't really know what they're doing either, I think I was
Yeah.
kind of like the guinea pig. I decided like, well, I think I could probably figure this all out on my own. So the biggest problem was, figuring out the titles, doing the title searches and making sure you're not bidding on a second mortgage or an HOA lien, which are, quite prevalent in Florida. And if you are bidding on a first lien mortgage, making sure that there's nothing else that is going to survive the foreclosure. So one of the first ones we bought through this company, they missed a whole whack of code enforcement liens, like into the tens of thousands. Yeah, that was a little bit gut wrenching. Which didn't know about these until this property in particular. I'm pretty sure we wholesaled it, and didn't know about these code infractions until the day before it was about to resell to an additional buyer. So that was a bit of an eye opener. So
how much, like, if you don't mind me asking, how much of like violations did they have?
So this is okay. I guess we weren't planning on going down this.
No, I know we weren't. We had just no intention of talking foreclosures, but it's so interesting.
Yeah, so I call this place the puppy mill. So this was like a really nice. Was it? I don't think it was a. I'm thinking it was a townhouse, but no, I think it was a single detached. But it was in a gated community.
Yeah.
Like the houses were kind of close together, so it was in an area of Miami, like pretty nice area of Miami.
Yeah.
And no, it was gated. It was kind of like unmanned gated, so you're still allowed to have access. So I had that company, so they would do the drive-bys, all these properties too. So it looked like a really nice property from the outside.
Yeah.
However, and we had to evict the occupant. So that that was like a 2-3 month process. But once we got into the place, it was like nothing I had ever seen before. I've seen a lot of since then, but at that time I was just like, wow, I can't believe this. So the people that were living in it were raising dogs in the property, and there was dog cages throughout. Well, the cages weren't there anymore, but you could see the imprints of the cages, and the imprints were left over from the urine and the feces that were surrounding it. Yeah, it was quite a disaster. We had to actually rip out all the flooring, some of the subflooring, cut out some of the drywall around the edges, just because it was like just
gross,
so right through. And this place was 10 years old, maybe. Like it was like, it wasn't like it was a 50-year-old house or 100-year-old
should not be in that condition. Yeah.
Oh, no, exactly. So the story goes, the person that was living there, the homeowner, was selling these dogs all throughout the city, and he was getting nabbed with not having a business license, not having some kind of like I guess you need some kind of a veterinarian license, or not a veterinarian license, but you needed some sort of a license to sell dogs.
Yeah.
Didn't have any of these things. So these fines all got attached to him, and they ended up getting attached to the property. So they weren't like code enforcement fines per se. They were more, I don't know, the company that I was using, because this consulting company, they like never even seen these before. Yeah. And they didn't come through the typical code enforcement channel. They came through the animal services division. So didn't know to check for those. So if memory serves, the fines were something like $28,000.
Oh, and and somehow that got tied to the property rather than the person, eh?
Yeah. So the guy disappeared, and so they couldn't track him down, so they just packed him onto the property. So I ended up having to hire an attorney, and we got them down quite significantly, but it was, they weren't going to forgive all of them, which was a bit of a burn. But yeah, we ended up getting it down like, by 20,000, or I can't remember exactly what we ended up paying. It was still
anyway. Yeah.
in the thousands, but I wasn't very happy about it in any event. And then plus we had to pay an attorney to fight them on our behalf. But so that was kind of my foray into foreclosures. Yeah, there's a few others where we took back, and you walk into these places, you're just like, wow, I can't believe these people live like it's just astronomical. So the ones that were vacant were okay generally because the bank would typically clean them out, but the ones that were occupied and we had to, well, the odd one would leave on their own accord, but we had to do the odd eviction here and there. But those are the ones that just ended up being total disasters because they leave the entire, their like belongs behind, and yeah, a lot of them were hoarders and what have you. So that kind of took me into mortgage investing nowadays, but we can get into that in a minute after.
Yeah, no kidding. So like for people, I think we've talked a little bit about foreclosures on the thing. So a lot of times you don't get to see these properties, the inside beforehand, right? Especially if you're buying it online from Canada, you won't see it at all. But usually, especially if you go to like auction.com, which I have a horror story I can tell, but I'm not going to do it on this show. But I didn't buy it, but I passed on a property that went to foreclosure.com. Someone else paid full price for it, and they have no idea what they're getting. I got it in pre-foreclosure, but anyway, but a lot of people don't realize a lot of times you don't get to see these properties. You're not touring them like you're on television on the HGTV and walking through these properties. A lot of times you're not supposed to go look in the windows. I know some people, find their way over there, but you're kind of taking a stab at this. So when you're looking for yours, I know when we had Katie Ross on, he was talking about a lot of times he's just looking for like brick houses, so he knows he at least has something. Was there something you were looking for when your criteria to find a foreclosure?
I was more concerned about at what price we could get it at. That was my main criteria. If we can get it at like a certain percentage of what the after repair value was, I didn't really have a specific criteria. It was up to a certain price point. Stay out of the really shoddy areas of South Florida. So stay away from bad areas. Up to a certain price point, and call it your maximum allowable bid or whatever. Just staying underneath that, and the market was really starting to pick up at that point, so it was pretty easy to turn around and resell it or rehab it and sell it again. So there was nothing really all that scientific. It was just it's just hard to find a deal and you can turn around and flip it.
And that was a few years ago. So what kind of price points? I know like South Florida, Miami is very expensive right now. What kind of purchase price ranges were you kind of in?
Probably everything under, I would say like under $300,000 after repair value. So we're paying between 150, 200, kind of in that price range, up to that point. Anything up to that and underneath. So
that is a good spot, especially for flipping, and you have a little bit less competition than the really cheap stuff, right? So
cool. Well, it's interesting you say competition. So it was back in like 2013. Well, right around that time is when all the hedge funds moved in. And they came in and just started buying everything, and they're buying them by the thousands, and they were paying like basically retail prices. So a house next door that was worth $300,000, and this one that could end up being a puppy mill, opposed to paying $200,000 for it, they would pay like $280,000, $290,000, like almost retail. So that happened in fairly short order. I'm like, I can't believe like all these properties are selling for such astronomical, ridiculous amounts. And that's kind of when that was about into 2014, 15. That's when I stumbled upon the fact that you could actually buy the mortgage prior to it getting to the foreclosure. So I was working with this group in South Florida, or well, I guess they're mostly all over Florida, but they're based out of South Florida. It was just fairly fortunate circumstance that and kind of long story how I met this group, but they were managing a fund out of New York that it was like a $500 million fund that bought these mortgages prior to the going to foreclosure for non-performing notes. And so they were managing all the assets in Florida for them. And so how I worked with them is we were buying stuff from just off the MLS as well, and auction.com, the REO properties from the banks.
Yep.
And they actually had some good leads to some REO properties with banks, what have you. So we would buy them and then using their crew to fix the properties up. And just starting to learn exactly what they did for this hedge fund out in New York, which, like I said, had like a $500 million under management.
Yeah.
That was when I was like, oh, wow, you can actually buy these before the mortgages, before it got to foreclosure. Because I had no idea how the process worked. I just knew that, once a bank started foreclosing on a borrower, the bank would either take it back or it got sold at auction and it went to someone else. And if the bank took it back, it became an REO. So that was like the epiphany moment. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can buy these from the banks and not have to worry about bidding at auction anymore and competing with hedge funds. Like it was like an epiphany. And so I was like, man, I really got to start learning more about this side of the business. And that was back.
So at this point, you're buying the mortgage instead of the property, or you're getting both.
Yeah,
just the mortgage. Okay.
The mortgage, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you have no rights to the property whatsoever until either you foreclose or you get a deed back from the borrower. Those are the two options typically.
Okay, so this is different than like doing the tax lien business where you're taking the lien and then you foreclose later. This is different than that, right?
It's actually similar to a tax lien investing. So you buy. You're buying a lien, and if you want to make sure you're buying a first mortgage, but there's a lot of people that do seconds. I typically just stick with first. I've got a few seconds in the portfolio, but they kind of came with pools of mortgages that I buy. But it's very similar. So you're buying the mortgage. It has the lien on the property, and that therefore gives you the right to foreclose. Well, do whatever you want with it, really. So like the number one strategy is to try to get the borrower to re-engage and try to get them to reinstate them and start making payments again. So that's always the number one strategy that we try to go with. And that's just like very, very tail end where it's like a month away from foreclosure and it's like almost a lost cause at that point in time where the borrower's probably just given up and they're just like, well, my house is going to get foreclosed on. But if you buy it early enough in the process, then you can use that option as well. So there's that option where you get them to reinstate some amount, some kind of good faith deposit put down, then they start making payments again. And and I should mention, so when we buy these, you can buy them at a discount to their face value typically because they're, a lot of times they're underwater, so the mortgage might be worth more than the property. So you can buy these at a discount, and since you can get them a discount, oftentimes you can actually pass that discount on to the borrower. So if they're paying, let's say, I'm just running out of round
just do an example,
so they're paying $1,000 a month. You buy it at a discount. You might be able to offer, say, can you do $700 a month? Well, first thing you want to figure out is why haven't they been paying so long? Is it job loss? Is it health reasons? Is it divorce? Like, there's a whole myriad of reasons why people stop paying their mortgage.
But you don't find that until you've already bought the mortgage, right? You don't.
No. So you're not allowed to make contact with any borrowers whatsoever before you're buying these. But once in half the battle in this business is trying to make contact. A lot of these people just kind of put their head in the sand and hopefully you're going to go away. But if and when you do make contact, you just kind of figure out, hey, we can't do nothing. Like we can't just sit here and let you live for free still. It's, the way I look at it is a rental business. If you've got a rental and people stop paying rent, I don't think you as a landlord are going to let them live there for very much longer if they're not paying rent. So I kind of look at it as the same type of business, right? So if they come back and say, I was working, I was making X amount a year, now I'm making this much. You say, okay, well, how much can you afford to pay then? So then we'll make some kind of arrangement on them making a lower payment, or sometimes they might even be able to pay more. To say, I lost my job a year or two ago. I've got a new job now. I'm making more money. I just didn't know who to pay, because oftentimes these loans get sold from banks to hedge funds to other hedge funds, and there's what are called loan servicers in the U.S. where it's not like the big banks in Canada where they typically you remit your payments to them. There's loan servicers that act on behalf of the debt holders. And sometimes these loans get changed hands so many times that these people just give up and just like, I don't even know who to pay anymore. So that does happen fairly often. It's actually fairly frequent
that happened to me, actually. It was like in my first year down there, and I bought the property, and they took all my ACH, automatic setup payment stuff, and the note got sold, and they told me, oh, it'd probably be a month or two until they start taking the first payments. They got to month 3, and I was like, called my mortgage broker. I'm like, they haven't taken any money out. Like, should I be doing this? And then he's like, I'll look into it. My note was sold 3 times, and they didn't pass the ACH withdrawal forms, and I had to catch up, which wasn't a big deal. But I could see how it easily could slip by without you noticing, especially if you're like, whatever, I'm not going to pay it. For me, I didn't want to go into foreclosure. I didn't want to be on the list. So I wanted to get caught up right away. Mine was a complete accident. Like, I was new, and I was like, oh, this is one of my first mortgages. I'm like, where the heck is a payment? Shouldn't it be coming out of my account? But total sidetrack. But yeah, it just can totally happen.
No, that's a good example right there. So like, it can happen to anybody really. So like, you were a paying customer, so you can imagine people haven't paid in a year or 2 or even 5, and then the loan gets sold 3-4 times. They're like so far gone at that point. I have no idea where you can pay anymore. But yeah, that does happen. And so yeah, getting back onto these people, if they've got some kind of income, then we'll do put them on a called a trial payment plan for the first little bit. Say, okay, if you make X amount of payments, we'll do a loan modification, and we'll take your $1,000 a month payment, and we'll permanently turn it into a $700 payment. And then sometimes if the loan's underwater, like let's say the property's worth $100,000 and the mortgage is $120,000, we'll chop $20,000 off the mortgage, or even a little bit more, so that they've got some equity built up into right from the get-go, and give them a bit more incentive to pay. So that's one option. Another couple of options are if the property's underwater, we can do a short sale. I know you had an episode on short sales not too long ago.
Yep.
So we are now the bank, so we can make decisions really quickly to say, yeah, we'll approve the price. It doesn't have to go through 20 people's different signatures and all the red tape through the big banks. So we can get those pushed through very, very quick. Another option is a deed in lieu. So if they just say, listen, I don't want this property. I don't want anything to do with it anymore. I've got nothing but bad memories here. Yeah, I'll sign it over. And then sometimes in that option, we'll give what's called a cash for keys. So similar to, if you're trying to get a tenant out, and sometimes being troublesome, say, listen, I'll throw you a few bones your way to vacate the property. So that, that's usually a bit of an incentive that helps them to pay for moving expenses, or maybe even a first person last down on a new property kind of thing. And then foreclosure is kind of like the last resort. If people just stick their head in the sand, they don't respond, sometimes that's the only option you're left with. So it's unfortunate we have to do that. But so I would say in about 50% of the cases we take the property back either through a deed in lieu or foreclosure, and then the other 50% are the people start paying again and go on a loan modification. So
you led me to a bunch of questions. So first of all, short sales, I tackled it from the investor perspective, but you're the bank. So how does this work exactly? So for them, the way I'm picturing it is like the owner occupant is going to be putting the property up for sale, or do you put the property up for sale and then you're willing to take a short on it, and then the tenant owner, or I guess not tenant, but owner occupied person, they're willing to take a short on it? Like how does it go? Like, you're not initiating the sale, like usually the tenant is, or the tenants, the owner occupant is initiating the sale of the property?
Yeah, so it's them that, well, you have to kind of encourage them, like give that as an option. So our loan servicers are the ones that reach out and say, listen, they'll give a list of options, kind of what I just ran through. Not so many words, like usually big long letters, like it's called loss mitigation. Here's your option. One of them would be a short sale. So that borrower would have to agree to list the property in that case. I usually like to make sure it's our preferred realtor that's doing it. especially a realtor that knows how to do a short sale, because there's a lot of different forms and what have you that they need to have done, to understand the process. So it's basically the borrower is just cooperating to sell the property, and they're the ones that, I guess you could say they quasi-initiate it. So it's kind of like on both our behalf, but they're the ones, it's just like a traditional sale. At that point, they have to cooperate with the realtor and anybody potential buyers coming through and have you. And then once an offer comes in, then the offer gets sent to us to approve it. And if we approve it, then it's just like a typical sale at that point, right? So.
Excellent. And then like for a foreclosure, because you said maybe half is going, well, not half of the half is going to the foreclosure sort of area. What's the cost of the foreclosure, and how does that sort of process look like? Because you physically have to get someone to remove the people from the building, possibly, right?
Potentially, yes. So a foreclosure is, so depending on the state, so there's what's known as judicial foreclosures and there's non-judicial foreclosures in the US. I can't remember what the breakdown is. I think it's 22 are non-judicial and then the rest are judicial. And don't take my word on that. It might be flip-flopped. But so if it's a judicial foreclosure, you have to go through the court system in order to get this, carried out through the end. So judicial foreclosures tend to be a lot longer. They're never less than a year, say, like 10 months to a year is like the very, very minimum that it takes to get these things pushed through. You need an attorney to do it. Well, you need an attorney to do a foreclosure regardless, but you need an attorney that's well-versed in navigating the local courts. And usually you want an attorney that's licensed in the state to do it for you. And those tend to be more expensive because they're pushed out longer, and everything's got to go through the court system. So judicial foreclosure so the attorney fees are usually start at about $2,500 to $3,000, but then there's court costs on top of that. So $5,000 is kind of about the going rate for judicial foreclosure, depending on the state. Like I said, they can go up to, I'd say, $6,000-$7,000, and now that's for an uncontested foreclosure. So that's like the borrower doesn't answer, or they just like say yes, I agree, I'm 5 years behind on my payments and I have no defense, kind of thing. So that's for an uncontested. If they contest it, it could run into like tens of thousands of dollars. So then there's the non-judicial foreclosure, and that's basically entails publishing in the local newspaper. Like, it's so old school, like they read the newspaper anymore to say, hey, my house is going to get going up for foreclosure. So it depending on the state and even sometimes the county, it gets published in the local paper for 3 to 6 weeks, whatever the case may be. And then there's a bunch of notices that have to go out that have to be, like serviced upon the homeowner. So a non-judicial foreclosure could take as little as like 90 days. Like, there's really, really quick foreclosure states like Texas and Georgia. And then some of them run up to like 6, 7, 8 months. But so non-judicial, you could typically get through within well less than a year anyway. And those costs are usually around $3,000, I would say. So yeah, your typical foreclosure, depending on non-judicial, judicials, anywhere from $3,000 to $7,000 on a uncontested basis.
Yeah. Okay. So if someone wanted to get into the foreclosure business, or even they're just like, for me, I'm always like, oh, if you're going to start brand new into this, why not pick an ideal place to do it? So if you're starting in this, you might want to just search for non-judicial foreclosure states, right? And then get your list, and then then go into your, what's landlord friendly, what's this, and you just keep cutting it down till you find your perfect haven to go do this.
Right.
That's the way I preach it anyway. I always hear about these people Canadians investing in these terrible states, and I'm just like, why?
Yeah. Well, I know I've got a couple states where I'm like, why am I in the state? I guess, but it actually it boils down to supply and demand as well for these notes. Like, as niche as of a business that it is there's been a lot of newcomers in the last couple of years, and I'll somewhat admit I'm kind of a newcomer, I guess, like in the grand scheme of things. Like, I started in 2015 doing just noting, well, I started dabbling into it in 2015, and then just kind of time 2017. So I've really only been into it like 3-4 years. So I'm, a relatively newcomer, but there's been a boatload of people come after me. So there's a lot of competition and not a lot of supply right now. So there's a bit of an imbalance. So the pricing for these things, I'm looking back to like, I started buying foreclosures. I'm like, oh, here I go again. Like, I started buying the foreclosures where I was getting some relatively good deals, and then in a short period of time, like, the demand went way up and the supply went way down. So now there's a bit of an imbalance in pricing. So it's actually getting tougher and tougher and tougher to find deals in this business, especially in non-judicial states, because everybody wants non-judicial because it's quick foreclosure and take a property over pretty quick if you need to. So
that's true. And every time you go against the grain and you pick the more difficult way to do it, like if you want to go buy like tax deeds in Ohio, it's a little bit more difficult in other states because I looked into it. And sometimes that means there's less competition because a lot of investors that are just going to pick wherever aren't going to pick that market.
Right. So. Well, in Ohio, you need to have like a certain, I can't remember how many loans you need to buy or how many things you need to buy, but it's like a certain threshold minimum investment.
I have a sheet on it right around here. I just was moving my papers around before, and I'm like, where did it go? I had all the details on it.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
It doesn't matter anyway. But yeah. So you do you create notes as well, or you just buy these notes? You mentioned something about that earlier.
Yeah. So when we take these properties back from foreclosure, sometimes, so the biggest risk in this business is you can't see the property either, right? It's just like buying a foreclosure, you can't see the inside of it. So when you're buying the mortgage, you can't see the inside of it. You can get drive-bys done. You can get like there's some services out there now that'll do like aerial drone images, so you can see if there's a back wall on the property.
Yeah,
and that does happen. Like there's big holes in the back. Yeah, or holes in the roof in the back. Like I haven't got this property back. I'm working on a deed in lieu in Pennsylvania. It's in the middle of nowhere, and I found it was vacant. So when it's vacant, you're actually allowed to have the property secured. So you can have a contractor go in and change the locks, make sure that if there's any missing windows, you have it boarded up so it doesn't cause any more damage. Well, this one particular property looked okay from the front. Wasn't the best looking property, a little bit overgrown. Man, I couldn't believe when they got in. The ceiling had collapsed in the back. The roof was caving in. There was a big hole between like this big sliding glass window and like there's nothing there, like just a hole. Like you can walk through it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that happens more times than not. But where I'm going with this is sometimes. So the biggest risk is trying to value these properties in an as-is condition, and that's one of the toughest part of this business. Is okay, if 9 times out of 10 of these people aren't paying their mortgage, oftentimes they're not paying their taxes. They're not putting money into the property either because they just like, well, I'm probably going to lose it anyway. And if they have no income, a lot of people are just scraping by the skin of their teeth, so they're definitely not putting money into these properties. So yeah, it's a very fine art on trying to value these. So fairly often you'll take one back and it's like, oh man, that this thing is not worth nearly as much as I thought it was going to be. Yeah. So you can either sell it as is and try to recoup as much as you can, or oftentimes a good option is to sell it on owner financing or as a holding note on it. Usually it's better to sell it to an investor that's going to buy it as an investment property and fix it up and flip it, or as a rental. But the odd time you can get a homeowner in there that's like, if that's handy, have them walk through the property and say, listen, you're buying this as is, like we're not taking anything whatsoever, but we'll hold the mortgage for you. Like you probably can't get a mortgage, but we'll still qualify them. So they got to have some. In order to get qualified, they have to have some sort of income to prove that they can make the payments, and there's a whole process that you have to go through. It's under the Dodd-Frank. I'm sure you've probably heard that term before.
Yeah.
It's like the ability to make, or the ability to repay. I think I can't remember the exact terminology, but so they get put through a mortgage loan originator to make sure that they can make these payments. I mean, their credit could be like in the 400s for all we care, but if they've got the income and a little bit of money to put down, then we'll make the case for do a seller financing deal. And depending on the state, we'll either do a traditional note mortgage or do a land contract, which
Yeah. So these people are already the owners of the house, because that would be the reason why to do seller financing rather than do a lease option or a land contract, right?
no, we never do it to the borrowers, like the people that are in the house.
So you want to put a new person in? Okay.
Yeah, definitely, yeah, because it's like you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? If
That's tough, yeah. That's what I was wondering. I was like, oh,
yeah,
man, like if they didn't pay them, are they going to really pay you, or they'll just pay you for a little bit? Is what was running through my head.
Yeah, I learned that mistake. Yeah, I've learned that mistake a couple years ago. It was one I took back, took the property back, or was going to take it back, and then they got foreclosed on. Or actually, it was a land contract, so there's a bit of a nuance. So land contract is kind of like owner finance, but you still own property, like you've got legal title to it. So it's almost quasi rent to own, and then there's like a traditional note mortgage where you sell the property to them, but you're holding it. So in this particular case, the people we so the benefit of a land contract is you don't actually have to foreclose, depending on the state and depending how long they've been in the property. You can just basically do an ejection. So it's almost like like a rental. So you just takes a little bit longer because it's got to go through the course. But so in this particular case,
and they're also, sorry to cut you off, but they are also on titles, so it's easier for the tenant or person who lives in the property to qualify for the loan because it shows a history that they've been there with a land contract. I could do a podcast on land contracts. Sometimes it's a little easier for them to qualify because they have a little bit more history than just being a tenant.
Yeah, the history. Yeah. So, but in this particular case, took it back. Got it for it's called a forfeiture. So it's very last minute for getting them evicted. They said, okay, listen, we've got I don't know, it was like X amount of dollars to put down. Would you consider doing another land contract? So resold it to them, and they put 10% down. I think it was. Did a new purchase price. It was basically the same purchase price they already had, and they paid for like 3 months, and then same thing. They just stopped paying. It's like, oh, here we go again, round number 2. Like, never do that again.
Oh.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So it's always ideal to get someone new in that
And I heard you say way back when we were talking foreclosure at the start, you said before you make them a deal is to get them paying again first, and then you can do a reduction and whatever, but start getting some sort of history. Don't just offer them a discount right off the start.
No. I mean, that's kind of like the last resort. Like if they do have some income, but they have no money to put down, we'll put them on, like I said, it's called a trial payment plan for 3 to 6 months and see if they start making payments. And then once they've hit that, or even 12 months, depending on, if they put any money down or not. And if they put some money down or some skin in the game, we might roll them into a loan modification after 3 to 6 months. But if they don't have anything, we'll say, listen, okay, we'll give you a reduced payment. We want 12 months of consistent payments again before we do a loan mod. So the reason there's a difference between a trial payment plan and a loan modification is you're taking that promissory note and you're modifying it into a new promissory note. So it's called a loan modification. And they're not cheap because you need either your servicer has to do it, but typically you have an attorney draft it up. And they're not that expensive, but they're $400 or $500. But that becomes the new term for that mortgage for the rest of the mortgage term. So you want to make sure that these people are definitely going to pay, because you do a loan mod and they bail out on it. It's like, basically at that point, you just got to foreclose So, but there's some, I've got a couple that they've had 2 or 3 loan mods, and, after third time's a charm, some of them playing like clockwork. So.
And you mentioned attorneys. So when you're creating these brand new notes, are you doing this yourself, or are you hiring someone for this?
No, definitely. Well, there's lots of templates. Like the Fannie Mae has a template that you actually produce your own, what have you. But no, we use a mortgage loan originator that produces all the documents, and then usually we go through a title company to do like a traditional closing, unless it's a land contract. So if it's a land contract, that is kind of like the trial basis. So we'll do a land contract if the state allows it, first of all, and there's a few other nuances, but
Yeah.
I'm a little bit concerned about if they don't put any money down, or they've only put like $1,000 or $2,000 down. I'll do a land contract if they've got the income to back it up.
Yeah.
But if they're putting, say, $5,000 down and they've got some pretty credible income to back it up, then we'll do no mortgage right off the bat because they've got some skin in the game. But if it's just a small amount, then we'll start off a land contract. And if they pay for 12 months, then we'll turn, so you can actually do a conversion to a traditional note mortgage where, you do the sale of the property to them and they take ownership at that point.
Yeah. And like you said, do some research on your land contracts, because there's a lot of states that don't allow it now, and there's a lot of states it's really frowned upon.
Yeah.
And you can Google it, or even if you just mention you're one of the Facebook groups for like that city and or that state, and you type in like, I'm looking to do a land contract. Anyone have any? You'll have people jump all over you if it's not allowed.
Yeah.
I had that.
I'm actually. Glenn, be careful, Ohio. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I know they're getting less happy with it.
Yeah.
Chad, this was awesome. I wrote like all kinds of notes, but they're all like a word or two, so I could probably spin this into like, we could do like 10 interviews and have you here all day. But if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do so? So
you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'll put my name in the notes. LinkedIn, I'm on a bunch of different Facebook groups, but my company's called Equa Growth Capital, and it's EQUIGROWPH Capital. You Google that. Email.
Let's talk about that. We'll give you like, the 60-second spin. Talk about what your company does for people and what do you do?
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's what my company does. Is we buy distressed mortgages throughout most of the U.S. and try to convert them back into paying customers again, and then if not, then we take the properties back through foreclosure, deed in lieu, and do whatever we want at the property at that point in time. So that's in a nutshell what the company does now. So yeah, and it's been a transition over a number of years. Like I said, starting out with doing rentals and then buying foreclosures, and I actually did some turnkey rentals for quite some time as well, and kind of like had the shiny object syndrome for quite some time until I stumbled upon the note business, and I've been doing that solid ever since. And it's definitely not a easy business, but it's it's fairly profitable if you know what you're doing. But there's also a lot of headaches along the way, and I've taken my lumps along the way as well. So, but they're all chalk them up to learning experiences. So.
Exactly. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Chad. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me so much.